start off with a question about India. We're 2 years into the administration of Prime Minister Modi. How he's been doing so far?
Popularity remains quite high. The party, of course, in all, I think the promises were extravagant, so there's some disappointment quite clearly that the reforms have not been as many or as expansive as some people had hoped. The Prime Minister's own emphasis has been on tightening the system, eliminating the slack, trying to make it more efficient rather than initiate sweeping reforms. And some of his effort to initiate some significant reform, like on the GST, on the generalized sales tax, that has kind of stalled at the political level. But luckily for him, I would think with the low oil prices and the general improvement on the manufacturing sector, I think we've seen some acceleration of growth. So India is now at least supposed to be, formally at least, for the last few quarters, the fastest growing economy in the world. So around 7%. So that has been good for him, and that has at least kept up the hope that, look, this government is going to produce at the end of its term significant outcomes in terms of where India is headed. But I would say the most success for this government has been on the foreign policy front, where he's brought, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi has brought a new sense of purpose, a new sense of energy into India's engagement with the world. And that, I think, much of the world is looking to see him. And I think that whether, they expect that he would make good on many promises, that he is a person capable of delivering on the promises made. So his international stock is very high, and that has worked very well for India's relationships with most countries. See, he has strong support in the lower house of the parliament. So that's in fact, I would say he's actually the first prime minister with a majority in the lower house. The last prime minister who had that support was Rajiv Gandhi, whose term came to an end in 1989. So really, for the first time in 30 years, you have actually a prime minister who has a strong presence in the lower house. But it is the upper house where his reforms have stalled, that they don't have the majority on their own to move anything in the upper house. And that's how many of his reform efforts have stalled.
He came to power about the same time that Prime Minister Abe did for his second. He got a lot of attention in the Japanese media because he had a close relationship with Prime Minister Abe. I remember when Prime Minister Abe started his Twitter account, he was following only Prime Minister Modi and one other account. It was evidence then of, I think, very strong top-level ties between Japan and India. Do you think those remain strong? Have they strengthened over the last few years?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the two prime ministers have really injected fresh energy into the relationship. You can trace the improvement of India-Japan relationship to the last decade when Prime Minister Koizumi came to India. That was 2005. And soon after Abe's first term, he had visited India as well. But after that, we went through a stall, in a sense. There was a series of changes in Japan, right, and things slowed down. But now you see there is strong commitment at the political level in both sides. And I think we've significantly expanded the agenda, both in the economic, on political, and in security affairs. So I would say this is probably one of the best moments in India-Japan relationship. But the potential, of course, is much bigger that needs to be realized in this relationship.
The economic ties. Japan won the contract to build the bullet train line between Mumbai and Ahmedabad. Is this something that was covered widely in India as well?
Of course. I mean, it's really the first time India has actually given a high-speed train contract, because there was a lot of resistance too. I mean, that whether we should do it at all, because the costs of it, and in an economy like a developing economy like India, can it afford, etc. But I think the Japanese made a strong case, and this is going to be really a demonstration project. If it succeeds, I think we'll see a lot more. But of course, there are other countries too competing for high-speed train contracts, including China.
This came soon after Japan lost the contract in Indonesia. There was a lot of disappointment then. I think Japanese industry, the train companies and so forth, are looking at it as definitely a growth opportunity. They want to build out more in India. But I think not just rail, but all sectors of the economy. A lot of industries are looking to India as an important market.
Yeah, And I would say India is growing well enough, and I think the Japanese interest has grown. The number of Japanese companies operating in India has also grown. But relative to the possibility, it is still small. Both the trade figures as well as investment figures remain somewhat low, though we've seen an uptick in the investment and trade in the last 2 to 3 years. But I think there's a lot that needs to be done. Of course, the Japanese companies still feel that in the business, ease of doing business in India is not as it should be. Prime Minister Modi is promising to change that. There is more that India can do to make it easier for the Japanese investors in India.
Do you see a lot of interest going the other direction? Is India interested in Japan as?
Yes, I mean, I think because the Japanese economy is the developed one, so I don't see many Indian investments, although there's some integration of the IT sectors, information technology sectors that's beginning to happen. And if Japanese liberalize their immigration or more diversification of the labor force, I mean, at some point maybe there'll be more Indian participation. But at this point, I mean, in terms of the investments, I'm sure most of it will be from Japan to India. But this trade, I think what we're going to see is the growth potential of India and the Japanese capabilities must be turned into a win-win outcomes for both of us.
Are there any sectors of the economy where India is looking specifically for more Japanese attention, inbound investment?
No, for example, on the infrastructure, for example, the Japanese have played a big role in promoting infrastructure in the rest of Asia, including China. So there's huge potential there. Plus, there is going to be a whole range of new areas. I mean, for example, on the manufacturing side, on building new cities, Japanese are going to be involved in building this new capital city of the state of Andhra Pradesh. It's a historic Buddhist town, so I think there's going to be very interesting contributions from the Japanese. So of course, India needs dollops and dollops of investment, and I think Japanese are well positioned to do it.
Politically, the nations get along quite well. Do you see a lot of progress and cooperation within larger frameworks, international frameworks?
Absolutely, and I think today we've restored the trilateral relationship with the US. There was some discussion of it in the last decade, but it kind of fizzled out. Now India, Japan and the US engage far more vigorously. They're meeting at the political level. The ministers meet now. There's also the joint military exercises that have started again between India, Japan, US. In fact, next month, that is in June, there will be the Malabar exercise taking place near Sasebo in Japan. Right. So I would say that's one part. And then there is a separate trilateral initiative where India, Japan and Australia work together, trying to create a framework for expanding cooperation in Asia. There is also the recognition that, look, we got to do more for regional connectivity, regional stability, regional maritime security. So in all these areas, I think India, Japan not only work bilaterally, but they work with other countries and in multilateral forums.
The relationship draws strength and vitality from people from all walks of life. Is there a lot of movement toward building these kind of ties at the business level, at a student level?
I think PM Modi and Prime Minister Abe both recognized that the level of the people-to-people contact is not what it ought to be, because in terms of the student exchanges, in terms of the young people traveling across, tourism, all that is way below potential. So I think there is an attempt to give it a big push. The two sides have also seen that, look, they begin to invest in strengthening the religious, cultural and the spiritual ties. So my sense is in the coming years we'll see significant growth, because there's just not been enough contact and communication at the popular level.
Japan traditionally is held to be a sort of a pacifist nation, inward-looking, depends on America for its defense. India has a tradition as militarily isolationist to some extent. Do these natures of the countries throw up any obstacles to a strategic relationship, to making that closer?
If you go back to the 50s, actually, there was a lot of warmth between Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, and the post-war Japanese leadership. Because unlike many in Asia, Nehru said, look, we should not isolate Japan. Nehru was quite clear that, look, Japan must play its role, whatever had happened in the war. The post-war Japan must be an integral part of constructing a new Asia. Nehru refused to sign the San Francisco Treaty, and he did a separate treaty with Japan. He waived any war reparations from Japan. So I think there was an extraordinary, political empathy that came from India, and I think that created very good bonds. But by the 60s, I think we began to drift apart, which was India, drew slowly closer to the Soviet Union. India became non-aligned and inward-looking policies. Well, Japan became very much part of a treaty ally for the United States. So as a treaty ally and as a non-aligned country, I mean, there seemed big differences in terms of how we began to read the world. And because India's economy was closing down, so it could not take full advantage of Japanese growth, which started taking place in the 60s and the 70s. Therefore, everything seemed to drive us apart after the 60s. So it's really with the 1990s where India reopens its economy. And Japan is, after the Cold War, is looking for a larger role. We try to construct a new relationship. But there's not much success because of the differences of the nuclear issue and a range of other things. We really can't move forward. But in the last 10 years, ever since India-US relationship improved, and Japan also began to take a fresh look at India. So I would say that's why in the last 10 years, we've seen a different attempt at a different way of looking at each other. That has been very productive phase. So now I would say there is a lingering residual, for Japan. The alliance issue is not a problem at all because India's own relationship with the US is improving significantly. So that's why we have this trilateral framework. India too, I think, is moving away from the non-aligned approach to one where India sees itself as a responsible power, that it needs to do more for the region and regional security. So this has brought us together in many ways. I think at a time when China has become very assertive, at a time when the US, many people don't know where the US is going, or the US domestic politics generates confusion about where the US is headed. So therefore, I think today there are far more objective conditions for India and Japan to take larger responsibilities in the region and as well as to work together. Because as two leading Asian powers, I think there's much that India and Japan could do both bilaterally, regionally, and with other powers like the United States and the Europeans.
When you talk about the trilateral relationship involving America, and also Japan has been very interested in bringing Australia into that as a four-party partnership. China tends to see this, of course, as trying to contain China's ambitions in the region. Do you think there's still plenty of room for Japan and India to work together in the face of China? That's it. As you said, its economy is not as fast as it used to be, but it is still a rising power.
No, look, China is the second largest economy, and I think all of us will continue to engage Chinese. Well, that doesn't mean we take everything they say as gospel. I think there is a political push. They keep saying that we should not, nobody else should get together. But India sits with the Japanese, with the Chinese and the Russians. So I don't see why we can't sit with the Americans and the Japanese also. So Chinese are creating their own institutions. There other people will create their institutions. To say there's only one way forward, this is exactly what the Chinese tell everyone. Look, everybody must choose their own path of development and friends. So I think India is doing the same. But I don't think today either India or Japan is trying to, shall we say, contain China, because China is too big to be contained. But a question of balance, a question of regional stability, those demand more cooperation between India and Japan and Japan and the US and Australia.
Japan's ties with India are obviously very strong and seem to be going in a very healthy direction, very vibrant. You can't generally say the same about Japan's ties with its neighbors. South Korea, with China, there are some thorny issues that it has to overcome. Would you have any recommendations to Japan for how to build a more constructive relationship with the neighbors? Or?
Look, I think Japan has been a good international citizen for more than 70 years since the end of the war. So I think this is quite unfair. I think for constantly making the war a central issue of how Japan ought to do it. I think there again, what our American friends and the Chinese and the Koreans say about Japan and the war, The story is not the same in Southeast Asia, and I think there have been problems there. I think at least some Southeast Asian countries, my own country, India, one section of our national movement saw Japan as a liberator. So it's not such a neat story, or it is a one that you say, look, Japan has to go around the world with an apology in its pocket always. So I think that phase should come to an end, and I think that's where Nehru was Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru was very correct in saying that, look, we got to move beyond. And I think I think they cannot be a stable Asia without Japan playing its full legitimate role in this part of the world. So therefore, the time has come, I think, for China, Japan, Korea and Japan to look beyond the past and to build a new framework. After all, they trade so much, they're quite integrated. So I think the politics sometimes, whether it's motivated or otherwise, I think is really prevents the genuine transformation of Asia.
Do you see any potential rough sailing ahead based on what happens this November for India or for Japan or for the trilateral ties?
Look, I disagree with all those people who think Americans are crazy or how do they produce the Trump? Look, I think it's a democracy, and I think we shouldn't forget that, how much the elite opinion in Washington and New York is holding its nose at what's happened. This has come through a democratic process. And my sense is Mr. Trump reflects a political trend. He's trying to mobilize the resentments that exist today in the US, especially those who feel that the US has spent too much blood and treasure in foreign military misadventures. Those who feel that, look, the globalization they've been losers in globalization. And that these people feel that, look, there's time for a change. The so-called internationalist elite in Washington and the banking elite in New York, if they're insensitive to what's happening in that country, I think that's what we're seeing, is that disconnect between the wealthy elite and the people. So it's after all populism of the kind that Trump has shown. It's a long tradition in the United States. It's not something that has fallen from the moon. So I think he's very much part of the American tradition, but I think it's a very decisive moment in American political evolution. So I think as outsiders, people like us, I think we must respect what's going on. 8 years ago, the Americans impressed the world by electing an African American as a president. Very few countries you could imagine a minority getting elected on a popular vote as a president. So I think the American system will throw up surprises. It has thrown up surprises before. But also outsiders, we have to deal with what emerges in the US. That is, the US decides, look, they have to reduce the role. So we're not anyone to tell them, look, it's right or wrong. That is an internal debate. But if the US says, look, after Iraq and Afghanistan, they need to lessen their responsibilities, then we have to deal with that situation. And that's where I think where India and Japan must be prepared to take larger responsibilities for security in the region. I'm not saying Japan should write a bigger check for Mr. Trump so that Americans can continue to depend, but I think there's a different way of doing the burden sharing between the two of them. I think if that is the argument, when Trump is saying, look, Korea and Japan are so rich and that they should take a bigger share. So I think how that burden gets distributed, I'm sure that's up for negotiation, if assuming he gets elected. So my sense is, I think we are at a cusp of a change. That things cannot go on the way they have in the security realm. That the Americans will do all that is necessary, and that we'll all have the right to criticize them when things go wrong. So I think the Americans are asking why. What's in it for us? I think that's an interesting debate. And as a major countries in this region, Japan and India should be prepared to do more things individually and bilaterally.
India in particular is in quite a volatile neighborhood. If America does decide it needs to withdraw militarily from overseas, is India prepared on a regional basis to sort of stake a bigger footprint in there?
Definitely. I think unlike in East Asia, where the US has physically been present with troops,
right,
and in the Middle East, again, I think we've seen the US had frequently intervened and involved. If some of that gets reduced, I mean, I think India will have to contribute more to the region's security. For example, in the Indian Ocean, where India has a strong naval force, we should be able to take more responsibilities in the Indian Ocean. We should be able to support more efforts for peace and reconciliation in the Middle East, and to construct a stable balance of power in East Asia. There again, I think India and Japan have a huge potential to work together to produce that stability, and to work, for example, in the Middle East or in Africa even, to expand growth and creating the new opportunities for this region. So I would say it's actually a very exciting moment, because if there is a reordering of the universe around us taking place, I think this increases the responsibility and the possibilities for both Tokyo and Delhi.
Do you have a message that you would deliver to the Japanese, either in the context of how you'd like to see them develop as partners for India or as members of the global community?
Look, I think, as I said, Japan has been a very good global citizen for the last 70 years. And today, I think the world demands that Japan play a larger role. Whatever the debates of Northeast Asia might be, Japan has no baggage in South Asia. In Africa, in the Middle East, people look to Japan. There's a lot of goodwill for Japan. So I think Japan should also look beyond the region, that not get trapped in this narrow debates with the Chinese and with the Koreans. And I think there is a world out there where people are nothing but goodwill for the Japanese. And the Japanese, I think, it should also be at a time when the US seems ambivalent, to be able to step up and to take more responsibility. And I think there will be a lot of support in South Asia, in the Middle East, for a more constructive, more positive Japanese role.
Great. Thank you very much.